Resonance of Shadows prologue. The town of Millfield had always been a nexus of enigmatic occurrences, where the past and present intertwined in a tapestry of secrets. Emma Carlyle's relentless pursuit of the truth behind Victor Ames' mysterious broadcasts had led her into the depths of the unknown. With each revelation, the boundaries between reality and the supernatural blurred, drawing her closer to a confrontation with forces beyond comprehension. As she prepared to face the darkness that had plagued Millfield for generations, Emma couldn't help but wonder if some doors, once opened, could ever be closed again. Chapter 1, Echoes from the Abyss. The morning sun struggled to penetrate the dense fog that enveloped Millfield, casting an eerie glow over the town. Emma sat in her cluttered study, surrounded by a labyrinth of documents, photographs, and recordings. The recent discovery of the resonator, a device capable of bridging realms, had unveiled more questions than answers. Victor Ames' journal alluded to entities lurking beyond the veil, and the shadows Emma had encountered seemed to affirm his darkest fears. As she sipped her coffee, now cold and bitter, a soft knock echoed through the room. Emma opened the door to reveal Mrs. Hawthorne, the curator of the Millfield Historical Society. The usually composed woman appeared visibly shaken, her eyes darting nervously. Wikipedia +4, Wikipedia +4, Wikipedia +4. Emma, may I come in? Of course, Mrs. Hawthorne. What brings you here so early? The curator entered, clutching a sealed envelope, its paper yellowed with age. This arrived at the Historical Society yesterday. It's addressed to you. Emma took the envelope, her name scrawled in elegant, antiquated script. She carefully opened it, revealing a letter dated over 50 years prior. Dear Miss Carlyle, if you are reading this, it means the shadows have returned. Millfield's history is fraught with darkness, and the resonator is but a key to a door that should remain closed. Seek the origin, and you may find the means to seal it forever. Eleanor Whitfield. The caretaker fan projects. Emma's heart raced. Eleanor Whitfield had vanished decades ago, her fate entwined with Victor Ames. How could she have foreseen Emma's involvement? Mrs. Hawthorne, do you know anything about Eleanor Whitfield's disappearance? The curator sighed, her gaze distant. Eleanor was a journalist, much like yourself. She delved into the town's mysteries and, like Ames, vanished without a trace. Some say she uncovered truths best left buried. Emma pondered the letter's cryptic message. The origin. What had Eleanor discovered? Chapter 2, The Veil Thins. Determined to follow Eleanor's trail, Emma revisited the Millfield Asylum, now a decaying monument to forgotten horrors. The building loomed, its shattered windows resembling hollow eyes. Armed with a flashlight and steely resolve, she ventured inside. Navigating the labyrinthine corridors, Emma's footsteps echoed, a stark reminder of her solitude. She descended into the basement, where she had previously encountered the resonator. The air was thick with an oppressive silence, as if the building itself held its breath. In the dim light, she noticed scratch marks on the floor, leading to a section of the wall that seemed misaligned. Upon closer inspection, she found a hidden latch. With a deep breath, she pulled it, and a concealed door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The air grew colder as she descended, each step a journey into the unknown. At the bottom, she discovered a chamber lined with shelves filled with ancient tomes, artifacts, and jars containing unidentifiable substances. In the center stood a pedestal, upon which rested a leather-bound book. Emma approached, her fingers brushing the book's cover. The title, embossed in faded gold, read, The Codex of Shadows. Opening it, she found detailed accounts of rituals, symbols, and a history of entities referred to only as the Whispering Ones. One passage caught her eye: the Whispering Ones are drawn to the Resonator's call, seeking to cross into our realm. To seal the breach, one must perform the rite of severance at the point of origin, where the veil is thinnest. Emma's mind raced. The point of origin. Could it be the site where the resonator was first activated? She needed more information. Chapter 3, The Nexus Point. Returning to the Historical Society, Emma scoured the archives for any mention of the resonator's initial activation. Hours passed, the sun dipping below the horizon, when she stumbled upon a set of blueprints for the Millfield Broadcasting Station. The plans detailed a sub-basement, not listed in any public records. A handwritten note in the margin read, "Installation of the resonator June 13, 1925. Emma's pulse quickened. The broadcasting station had been the epicenter. If she could access the sub-basement, she might find the point of origin. Chapter 4, Descent into Darkness. The Millfield Broadcasting Station stood as a monument to a bygone era, its Art Deco facade now marred by time. Emma approached the building under. To the elevator that only goes down. Part 1, a job with a view. I had never been afraid of elevators. They were just metal boxes, moving between floors, taking people from one place to another. Efficient. Predictable. But that was before I started working the night shift as a security guard at the Wexley Tower. Before I found the elevator that wasn't supposed to exist. Part 2, the basement that disappeared. The Wexley Tower was one of the tallest buildings downtown. At night, it was dead silent, just the hum of air conditioning and the occasional flicker of fluorescent lights. The night shift was easy. Patrol the hallways, check the security cameras, make sure no one was wandering around where they shouldn't be. The basement was off limits. But that was the problem. There was no basement. Not on the blueprints. Not on the elevator panel. Not on any official record. And yet, last night, I found a door labeled B1. And when I pressed the elevator button, it opened. Part 3, the first descent. The elevator was wrong. It looked normal at first, polished steel, overhead lights flickering slightly. But when I stepped inside, something felt off. I looked at the buttons. The standard floors were there 1 through 40, but below them, something new had appeared. B1. I hesitated. My radio crackled, breaking the silence. A voice, distorted, staticky, whispered, "Going down." I slammed the door open button. Nothing happened. The elevator began to move. Part 4, the floor that shouldn't exist. The descent felt too long. Too slow. When the doors finally opened, I stepped into darkness. A long hallway stretched out before me, lined with doors on either side. The walls were damp, the air heavy with the smell of dust and something rotting. And then I saw it. At the end of the hallway, beneath a flickering exit sign, stood a man. Or at least, something that looked like a man. Part 5, the voices in the dark. I tried to step back into the elevator. The doors slammed shut before I could reach them. The lights in the hallway flickered. The figure at the end of the hall didn't move. But the doors around me did. One by one, they creaked open. And from the darkness inside, I heard whispers. Voices calling my name. I turned. I ran. But no matter how far I ran, the hallway never ended. And behind me, the whispers grew louder. Part 6, the room with no exit. I threw myself through the nearest door and slammed it shut. Darkness. Silence. Then a single overhead light buzzed to life. I wasn't in a normal office. There was a desk covered in dust, a chair turned away from me. And then I saw the papers. Old, yellowed documents. Employee records. My name was on top. I wasn't alone. The chair slowly turned. And sitting in it, was me. Part 7, the elevator that never stopped. Petty don't remember how I got out. Maybe I screamed. Maybe I ran. But somehow, I found the elevator again. I slammed the closed door button. The doors shuddered, resisting. Then, just before they shut, I saw them. The doors in the hallway, every single one opened at the same time. Figures poured out. Identical copies of me. Smiling. The elevator doors slammed shut and rocketed upwards. I hit the one button over and over, my breath coming in ragged gasps. When the doors finally opened, I was in the lobby. Part 8, the ending that wasn't. I ran outside. The night air hit me like a punch to the chest. I was safe. Or so I thought. As I walked to my car, I caught my reflection in the building's glass windows. And my reflection didn't move. Then, it slowly raised a hand and waved. And behind it, in the reflection of the lobby, the elevator doors opened again. Waiting for the next one. Part 9, the next shift. I called my boss the next morning. Told him I was quitting. He didn't sound surprised. "You lasted longer than most," he said, chuckling. "Guess we'll need a new guy." I didn't respond. Just hung up. But then my phone buzzed. A new message. Going down. The sender was unknown. I turned off my phone and drove. Drove for hours, past the city limits, into the emptiness of nowhere. But that night, at the motel, I saw something that made my blood freeze. The mirror in my room showed the elevator doors opening behind me. I turned. The motel closet was just a closet. But when I blinked, I saw a B1 label appear on the door. The light in my room flickered. The radio on the bedside table crackled. Going down. The last night shift, Episode 3. The library that closes itself. Part 1, the quiet place no one visits. Libraries are supposed to be peaceful. Silent sanctuaries filled with books, untouched by time. That's what I thought when I took the night shift at the Holloway Public Library. But some places should not be left alone at night. Part 2, the strange closing time. I started noticing it on my second night. The library was supposed to close at 9 p.m. sharp. That's when the last visitors left, the overhead lights dimmed, and silence took over. But at 2:47 a.m., something happened. The main entrance door locked itself. Every night. Same time. Without fail. It wasn't a mechanical lock. It wasn't an alarm system. It was something else. I tested it once. At 2:46 a.m., I stood by the door, staring at the clock on my phone. The second it turned to 2:47, I heard a click. I pulled the handle. Locked. And then the bookshelves started moving. Part 3, the rearranging shelves. At first, I thought it was my imagination. The aisles seemed longer than before. Books I had organized hours ago were misplaced, as if someone had been browsing after closing time. Then, on my fourth shift, I saw it happen. A bookshelf moved on its own. Not a subtle shift. Not a gentle creak. The entire shelf slid 3 feet to the left, right in front of my eyes. And behind it, where there should have been a wall, was a new aisle. An aisle that wasn't on the blueprints. Part 4, the hidden section. Curiosity got the better of me. I stepped into the newly revealed space, expecting old archives or forgotten books. Instead, I found a single desk, covered in dust. On the desk was a journal. And on the first page, written in shaky handwriting, "Do not be here at 2:47 a.m. The lights flickered. And then I heard footsteps. Part 5, the sound of someone reading. I wasn't alone anymore. From the aisles behind me, I heard the soft rustle of pages turning. The sound of someone reading. I turned around, expecting to see a lost visitor. No one was there. But the books were moving. One by one, they slid from the shelves, their pages flipping wildly as if being read by invisible hands. And then I heard it, a whisper. "You shouldn't be here." Part 6, The Missing Librarians. I ran back to the front desk, my breath coming in short gasps. I grabbed the phone, dialing the number for my supervisor. No dial tone. I checked the employee log, looking for names of past night shift workers. There were none. Not a single record of anyone working the night shift before me. And yet, as I flipped through the pages, I found a note scribbled in the margins. If you hear them reading, do not answer. I looked up. The library was no longer empty. Part 7, The Unfinished Stories. Figures sat in the chairs. Dozens of them. Their faces obscured by the books they held, their fingers slowly turning the pages. They didn't move. Didn't react. Just read. I stepped backward. My foot hit something. Another book. It had fallen open. I picked it up and felt my stomach drop. It was a journal entry. My journal entry. It described everything that had happened that night, up until this exact moment. Then, at the bottom of the page, the final line appeared: "You are now part of the story." Part 8, The Library That Never Lets Go. The clock struck 2:47 a.m. The lights flickered out. The door at the entrance unlocked. And the readers turned the page. As I ran for the exit, I could hear my own voice whispering from the bookshelves. You shouldn't be here. But I was. And I always would be. Because some stories never end. The Last Night Shift, Episode 4, The Hotel Room That Doesn't Exist. Part 1, A Normal Night at the Grand Hollow Hotel. I took the night shift at the Grand Hollow Hotel because I thought it would be easy money. Check in a few late night guests, deal with drunks from the hotel bar, maybe watch a little TV behind the counter. That was the plan. But that was before I found room 191. Part 2, The Guest Who Never Left. The first time I noticed something was wrong, I was checking the reservation system. Room 191 had been booked every single night for the last 20 years. Same name. Same credit card. No checkouts. It was always occupied. But when I checked the master key log, the door had never been opened. Part 3, The Door That Shouldn't Be There. I decided to check it myself. Maybe there was a mistake in the system, or a storage room mislabeled as a guest room. I took the master key and headed down the hallway. But when I reached the space where room 191 should be, there was no door. Just smooth wallpaper, stretching unbroken between room 190 and room 192. I frowned. The hallway felt off. Longer than I remembered. I turned to leave. Then, behind me a door appeared. Part 4, The Knock from the Inside. I stared at it. The number 191 gleamed on the brass plate. The door looked old, much older than the rest of the hotel. I reached out, pressing my palm against the wood. It was warm. Then knock. 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 From the inside. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. Then the knob turned. And the door began to open. Part 5, The Room That Wasn't a Room. I don't know what I expected to see. A forgotten storage closet. An abandoned suite. Instead, I saw a hallway. Not like the ones in the hotel. This one was wrong. The walls were lined with mirrors stretching endlessly in both directions. The floor was covered in a deep red carpet, frayed at the edges. And the air, it smelled old. Like dust and something long dead. Then I saw him. A man standing at the end of the hallway, his back turned to me. I should have run. But I didn't. Instead, I whispered, "Hello." He turned. And I saw my own face. Part 6, The Other Me. He smiled, his expression eerily familiar. But something was off. His eyes were too dark. His skin too pale. Like a distorted version of me, Something trying too hard to be human. "You finally found me," he said. His voice was my voice. I couldn't move. He stepped closer. "I've been waiting for you to check in." Part 7, the guest book. I took a step back, but the hallway behind me was gone. Only the room remained. A small table sat in the corner, an open guest book resting on top. I looked down at it. There were only 2 names. Mine. And his. My hands trembled as I flipped the pages. Each one was filled with my handwriting. Entries from nights I never lived. Conversations I never had. A record of me, staying here, forever. The pages wouldn't stop turning. And in the reflection of the mirrors around me, I wasn't the one turning them. Part 8, the final check. Eni ran. I sprinted for the door, slamming my shoulder into it. The hallway outside was gone. Only more mirrors. And my reflection didn't move. Instead, it smiled. Then it stepped forward. Out of the mirror. The last thing I saw before everything went black was myself, reaching out to take my place. Part 9, the next night. The next morning, I woke up behind the front desk. Everything was normal. The lobby. The guests. The buzzing of the overhead lights. Except for one thing. Room 191 was gone. No record. No door. Nothing. And when I looked at my reflection in the computer screen for a split second, I saw him. Still trapped inside the mirrors. Still waiting. And he was smiling. The Last Night Shift, Episode 5. The Night Shift That Never Ended. Part 1, the clock that stopped my first night at Keller's 24-hour convenience store was supposed to be easy. Stock the shelves. Ring up the occasional late-night customer. Drink cheap coffee to stay awake. But then I noticed the clock. It had stopped at 3:15 a.m. And no matter how much time passed, it never moved. Part 2, the customers that shouldn't be there. At first, I thought it was broken. I checked my phone. 3:15 a.m. I shrugged it off and went back to stocking shelves. A few minutes later, the door chimed. A customer walked in. He wore a faded hoodie, his face obscured by the shadows of his hood. He moved strangely, like he wasn't fully awake. I greeted him. He didn't respond. Instead, he walked straight to the back of the store. To the storage room, where customers weren't allowed. I followed. But when I opened the door, he was gone. Part 3, the cameras that lied. I ran back to the counter, breathing heavily. I checked the security cameras. The footage showed the front door opening. The man in the hoodie stepping inside. And then, nothing. No footage of him walking through the aisles. No footage of him disappearing. Just static. Then, a voice crackled through the intercom. "Your shift never ends." Part 4, the stock that never ran out. I tried to calm down. Maybe it was just a prank. I went back to stocking shelves. That's when I noticed something. The items I stocked earlier, they were gone. Not purchased. Not moved. Just gone. I checked the back storage room. The shelves were full again. Exactly as they had been when I started my shift. I checked my phone again. 3:15 a.m. Part 5, the manager who wasn't really decided to call my manager. The phone rang twice before someone picked up. Keller's Convenience. "How can I help you?" a voice answered. "Hey, it's me. Something weird is happening during my shift." Silence. Then, in a voice identical to mine, the person on the other end said, "Your shift never ends." The line went dead. I looked up at the security monitors. The front door was open. And I was standing outside. Part 6, the other May froze. The figure outside wasn't just similar to me. It was me. Same uniform. Same messy hair. Same exhausted eyes. He or it tilted its head, as if examining me. Then, it grinned. And started walking toward the door. I grabbed the keys and ran to the entrance. Locked it? The other me didn't stop. He reached the glass and placed his hand against it. His lips moved. Let me in. Part 7, the shift that repeats. I backed away, heart pounding. The lights flickered. When they came back on, he was gone. I turned back to the counter. My stomach dropped. The shelves were full again. The register was reset. The clock. Still 3:15 a.m. Then, the door chimed. Another customer walked in. A woman this time. Her face was familiar. She walked straight to the storage room. I turned to the cameras. Static. Then, through the intercom, your shift never ends. Part 8, the final decision. I don't know how long I've been here. I don't know if there's a way out. Every time I try to leave, the door just resets. The shelves refill. The clock stays frozen. And every night, another version of me shows up outside. Waiting. Smiling. Maybe if I let him in. Maybe if I step outside, I'll finally go home. Or maybe I'll just be replaced. Check your spelling or try different keywords. The Last Night Shift, Episode 6. The Gas Station with No Exit. Part 1, the job that seemed too easy. When I took the night shift at Crossroads Gas and Convenience, I thought it was a joke. The place was in the middle of nowhere, sitting on a lonely stretch of highway with barely any customers after dark. My job was simple: watch the register, refill the coffee, and make sure no one stole beer from the fridge. Easy money. Or so I thought. Until the first customer walked in. And never left. Part 2, the man who wouldn't leave. It was 12:03 a.m. when he entered. A tall man in a dusty jacket, his hands stuffed into his pockets. He moved slowly, pacing the aisles without picking anything up. After 10 minutes, I cleared my throat. Need help finding something? He turned to me. His eyes were too dark. Too deep. As if they weren't looking at me, but through me. Just waiting, he said. Then he smiled. And kept waiting. Part 3, the highway that led nowhere. An hour passed. Then another. The man didn't move. He stood near the soda fridge, hands still in his pockets, head tilted slightly as if listening for something. At 2 a.m., I stepped outside for a smoke. The night was too quiet. I looked down the highway, expecting to see headlights in the distance. Nothing. Not a single car. Just an endless stretch of road, fading into the blackness of the desert. Then I turned back toward the store. And saw something that shouldn't be possible. Part 4, the reflection that wasn't mine. The gas station had big glass windows, reflecting the fluorescent glow of the interior. But as I looked closer, I noticed something was wrong. My reflection was standing still. I lifted my hand. It didn't move. Then, slowly, it smiled. I stumbled backward, my cigarette falling from my lips. When I looked back at the window, the reflection was gone. But the man inside, he was staring straight at me. Smiling. Waiting. Part 5, the door that wouldn't open. I rushed back inside, heart pounding. All right, man, store's closed. You need to leave. He didn't move. Didn't even blink. I grabbed the phone. No dial tone. The clock above the register read 3:15 a.m. I turned back to the man. There were two of him. Standing side by side. Both smiling. Both waiting. I ran to the door. Yanked at the handle. Locked. Part 6. The customers who weren't customers. The bell above the door chimed. More people entered. A woman in a red dress. A kid in a baseball cap. An old man with hollow cheeks and sunken eyes. They spread out, wandering the store. None of them spoke. None of them picked anything up. They just waited. And when I looked back at the register, the first man was gone. But I could still feel him watching me from somewhere just beyond sight. Part 7. The gas pump that never stopped. Desperate, I ran outside again. The gas pump stood silent and still, except for one. Pump number 4. The handle was off the hook, gasoline pouring endlessly onto the pavement, pooling into a dark shape at my feet. The puddle stretched outward, too far, spreading across the concrete in unnatural patterns. Then I saw it. A reflection in the gasoline. Not of me. Not of the gas station. But of something else. Something waiting on the other side. Part 8. The clock that moved backwards. I ran back inside. Grabbed my phone. Still 3:15 a.m. I turned to the clock on the wall. 3:14 a.m. I blinked. 3:13 a.m. The clock was moving backward. Each second that passed, I felt something pull at me. Something dragging me backward in time. Then, from behind me, a whisper, almost time. I spun around. The store was empty. Part 9. The final warning. I ran to the employee break room, searching for another way out. That's when I saw the note. A single, crumpled piece of paper taped to the fridge. Written in shaky handwriting, "Do not be here at 3:00 a.m. I looked at the clock. 3 a.m. And the lights went out. Part 10. The gas station that doesn't exist. Darkness swallowed me. I could hear them moving in the aisles. The whisper of footsteps. The sound of breathing that wasn't mine. Then, through the blackness, I saw a faint glow. The gas station sign. Flickering. I sprinted toward the door, pushing through the shadows, through the unseen hands grabbing at me. I slammed into the glass and fell outside. The air was cold. The night was silent. The gas station was gone. Nothing but an empty lot. No pumps. No building. No lights. Just an old, cracked road sign swaying in the wind. It read, "Crossroads Gas, closed since 1983. Part 11. The next shift I walked for miles, eventually hitching a ride back into town. When I told people where I had worked, they just stared at me. That place? It's been abandoned for decades. No one believed me. But when I checked my phone that night, my shift was still scheduled. And the clock read 3:15 a.m. Then, a message appeared on my screen. From an unknown number. "You're late. The last night shift, episode 7. The morgue that never empties. Part 1. The coldest job. Working the night shift at a morgue is supposed to be uneventful. The dead don't talk, they don't move, and they don't cause problems. At least, that's what I thought before I started at Holloway County Morgue. Before I realized that every morning, when the day shift arrived, there were always more bodies than the night before. Even when no one had died. Part 2. The unregistered cadavers. The first time it happened, I thought it was a clerical error. There were 4 bodies in the cold storage when I clocked in. By the time my shift ended, there were 6. I checked the intake log. No new arrivals. The doors had been locked all night. There was no way those extra bodies had gotten in. Part 3. The unfamiliar faces. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. Then, one night, I recognized one of them. A man in his mid-40s. Pale skin. Sharp features. I had seen his face before. In the mirror. He was me. Part 4, the drawer that wouldn't stay closed. I locked the morgue drawers myself that night. Triple checked every latch. But when I turned back, one of them was open. Drawer number 14. The tag on the toe of the body inside had my name on it. Part 5, the shifting shadows. The morgue had a single security camera. I checked the footage. It showed me walking between the aisles, marking cadavers, checking files. Business as usual. But then the shadows started moving. Not mine. Not the gurneys. Something else. Something larger. Something watching me. And then, at exactly 3:15 a.m., the camera cut to static. Part 6, the missing reports. I decided to confront my supervisor the next day. Where do the extra bodies come from? I asked. He looked at me, his face unreadable. Then, slowly, he pulled open a drawer in his desk. Inside was a file with my name on it. I flipped through the pages. They detailed my own autopsy. Time of death, March 15th. Cause, undetermined. That was 2 weeks ago. I was still standing. Part 7, the cold room. That night, I made a decision. I would stay past dawn. Wait until the day shift arrived. Make sure the extra bodies didn't appear. At 4 a.m., the lights flickered. At 4:13 a.m., the temperature dropped. By 4:30 a.m., I heard it. A voice. Low. Whispering. I turned toward the cold storage units. The doors were all open. And the bodies were sitting up. Part 8, the morgue that never empties. I ran to the entrance, but the doors wouldn't budge. Behind me, the bodies stepped down from the tables. One by one, they turned to face me. And they all had my face. Then, the security camera flickered back on. I saw myself on the screen. I wasn't standing in the morgue anymore. I was lying on one of the tables. Eyes open. Staring at the ceiling. Waiting for the next night shift to arrive. The Last Night Shift, Episode 8. The Museum That Wakes Up at Midnight. Part 1, a job among the dead. I took the night shift at Holloway Museum because it seemed like the easiest gig in town. No customers. No loud noises. Just me, some old artifacts, and a security camera system that barely worked. I thought it would be peaceful. But on my third night, at exactly 12 a.m., the exhibits started moving. And I realized I was not alone. Part 2, the mannequin that wasn't there before. The museum had a permanent exhibit on ancient civilizations. Stone masks, old pottery, a few wax mannequins dressed in robes to give visitors an idea of how people lived centuries ago. At 11:45 p.m., I did my first round. At 12 a.m., I walked through again. And there was a new mannequin. I was sure it hadn't been there before. It stood at the far end of the exhibit, dressed in tattered, dark robes. Its face was obscured by a deep hood. Something about it made my stomach churn. I reached for my radio to call my supervisor. Then I saw it. Its head moved. Part 3, the whispering statues. I turned and walked out of the exhibit, trying to convince myself I imagined it. Then I heard the whispering. At first, I thought it was coming from the radio. A garbled sound, like static mixed with voices. But the radio was off. The whispering was coming from behind me. From the statues. Part 4, the missing faces. I forced myself to turn around. Every statue in the exhibit was facing me. I could have sworn they had all been looking in different directions before. And their faces, they were gone. The carved eyes, noses, mouths wiped away, like the stone had been smoothed over. Then, slowly, they started to move. Part 5, the exhibit that wasn't on the map. I ran straight to the security office, locking the door behind me. My hands shook as I checked the cameras. The screen flickered, showing different exhibits: ancient Egypt, the fossil hall, the hall of mythology. And then, a new feed appeared. One that wasn't supposed to exist. It showed a hallway I had never seen before. At the end of the hallway, the camera flickered. A door stood open. And inside, something was waiting. Part 6, the room that didn't exist yesterday. I left the office, gripping my flashlight so tightly my fingers ached. I had to find that hallway. I walked through the museum, my footsteps echoing off the marble floor. Then I saw it. A corridor that shouldn't have been there. The walls were different, older, darker, covered in symbols that hadn't been cleaned in centuries. And at the end, the open door. Part 7, the ritual that never ends. Inside the room, a long table stretched across the floor. Objects were laid out carefully: a dagger, a cup filled with something dark, a heavy book covered in dust. And standing beside the table, the mannequin. But now, it wasn't a mannequin. It was breathing. Its chest rose and fell in slow, deliberate motions. Then it spoke. It's midnight. The door slammed shut behind me. Part 8, the faces on the wall. The walls were lined with faces. Hundreds of them. Stone faces, carved into the walls, each one frozen in silent horror. And then, as I watched, their mouths opened. And they screamed. Part 9, the curse that kept them here. The mannequin stepped forward, its hood slipping back. Its face was mine. You stayed too long, it whispered. Now, you're part of the exhibit. I turned, slamming my fists against the door. Let me out. The whispering rose to a deafening roar. Then the room went dark. Part 10, the next night when the lights flickered back on, I was standing in the exhibit. Frozen. Unable to move. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. A glass panel stood in front of me, and beyond it a new security guard was walking through the museum. He stopped. Looked at me. Then he frowned. Because I was a mannequin now. Waiting. For the next shift. For the next person who stayed too long. The last night shift, episode 9, the subway that never stops. Part 1, the last train of the night. I took the night shift as a subway operator, thinking it would be simple. Drive the train, make a few stops, pick up the last passengers of the night. Easy money. But then I noticed something odd. No matter how many times I reached the last station, the train never stopped. Part 2, the tracks that led nowhere. It was my third shift when it happened. I had just passed the second to last station. The subway car was empty except for a man in a business suit, fast asleep in the last row. The intercom crackled, next stop Endline station. I eased back in my seat. A few more minutes and I'd be done for the night. Then the lights flickered. And the train kept going. Part 3, the endless tunnel. I frowned. The train should have stopped. Instead, it kept speeding forward, deep into the tunnel. I checked the controls. Everything seemed normal. The GPS showed us at Endline station. But outside the window, there was no platform. Only darkness. Part 4, the passenger who shouldn't be there. I grabbed the radio. Dispatch, this is train 573. We passed Endline but haven't stopped. What's going on? Static. Then a voice whispered, you have one more stop. My blood turned to ice. I spun around to check the passenger. The seat was empty. But a briefcase sat on the floor, wide open. Inside it a newspaper dated 10 years in the future. And on the front page my own obituary. Part 5, the tunnel with no end. He hit the brakes. The train shuddered, sparks flying along the rails, but it wouldn't stop. The speedometer climbed higher. The tunnel outside. It didn't end. The walls flickered past, a blur of darkness and shadow. And then I saw them. Figures. Standing between the tracks. Not passengers. Not workers. Just, watching. Then, one of them stepped onto the rails. And the lights went out. Part 6, the subway graveyard. When the lights came back, the train was moving slower. I turned back to the windshield and felt my stomach drop. We weren't underground anymore. We were somewhere else. The tracks stretched into an endless, fog-covered expanse. Old subway cars, rusted and broken, lined the sides like a graveyard of forgotten trains. I stepped out of the control cabin and looked down the car. And that's when I saw them. The seats were no longer empty. They were filled with passengers. Part 7, the silent passengers. They sat perfectly still. Men in old-fashioned suits. Women in dresses from another era. A child clutching a toy that hadn't been made in decades. None of them moved. None of them blinked. Then, in unison, they turned their heads toward me. And at the exact same time they all whispered, "You're late." Part 8, the station that shouldn't exist. A bell rang overhead. I turned back to the windshield. A platform was approaching. Not one I had ever seen before. It was massive columns stretching into the fog, old wooden benches lining the sides. And standing on the platform were more passengers. Hundreds of them. Waiting for me. Part 9, the last stop. The train screeched to a stop. The doors hissed open. And one by one, the passengers stood up. They stepped forward, their footsteps making no sound, their faces blank. I wanted to move. To run. To wake up from whatever nightmare I had fallen into. But my body wouldn't listen. Then, one of them, the man from the last row of my train, whispered in my ear, "This is your last stop." And he reached for me. Part 10, the next operator. The next morning, the subway was found in an abandoned tunnel beneath the city. No tracks led to it. No records showed that it had ever existed. But inside the control cabin a new operator sat at the controls. Me frozen in place. Eyes open. Waiting. For the next train to arrive. For the next night shift to begin. Because some trains never stop. The Last Night Shift, Episode 10. The Hospital That Doesn't Let You Leave. Part 1, a routine job turned nightmare. I took the night shift as a security guard at Holloway General Hospital, thinking it would be easy money. The place was quiet after dark. The emergency room slowed down. Most patients were asleep. All I had to do was walk the halls, check the cameras, and make sure no one was where they shouldn't be. Simple. Until I tried to leave. And realized the hospital wouldn't let me. Part 2, the locked doors. My shift ended at 6 a.m. I grabbed my things and headed for the exit. But when I pushed on the glass doors they didn't move. I checked the lock. It wasn't jammed. I tried another door. Then another. None of them would open. Then, over the intercom, a voice crackled, "You're not done yet." Part 3, the patient who wasn't there. I rushed back to the security desk and checked the monitors. Something wasn't right. In room 306, a patient lay in bed, hooked up to a heart monitor. The problem? Room 306 had been empty all night. I checked the logbook. No new admissions. I grabbed my flashlight and headed upstairs. The hallway was dead silent. I reached room 306 and peeked inside. The bed was empty. But the heart monitor was still beeping. Then, from behind me a whisper, "You're late." Part 4, the endless hallway. I spun around. The hallway was empty. I walked back toward the elevator. But when I turned the corner the hallway stretched on forever. Doors lined both sides, all of them marked 306. I turned back toward room 306. It was right behind me. I wasn't walking in circles. The hospital was changing around me. Then, one of the doors creaked open. Part 5, the unfinished surgery. I stepped inside. The room was wrong. Surgical lights dangled from the ceiling, flickering on and off. An operating table stood in the center, covered in dried blood. And lying on it was me. Eyes open. Chest still rising and falling. A scalpel rested on my chest. And the surgical team was watching me. Part 6, the doctor who didn't have a face. The head surgeon leaned forward. He wore a mask. But beneath it there was nothing. No eyes. No mouth. Just smooth, blank skin. He picked up the scalpel. "The procedure isn't finished yet," he whispered. Then he raised the blade. Part 7, the morgue that knows your name. I ran through the endless hallways, past the repeating doors. Then, I saw it, the morgue. The door swung open before I could stop myself. Inside, rows of steel drawers lined the walls. And one of them had my name on it. Part 8, the cold hands. I stepped closer. My breath came out in short gasps. The drawer slid open on its own. A body lay inside, covered by a sheet. I reached forward. Then a hand grabbed my wrist. I screamed. The body sat up. And I saw my own face staring back at me. Part 9, the night shift that never ends. I blacked out. When I woke up, I was sitting at the security desk. The cameras flickered. The halls were empty. I checked my watch. 12 a.m. My shift had started again. And I knew I would never leave. The last night shift, episode 11. The hotel room that wasn't there yesterday. Part 1, a shift I wasn't supposed to take. Wasn't even scheduled to work that night. My boss at the Holloway Grand Hotel called last minute, begging me to cover for someone who had called out sick. I needed the money. So I said yes. I should have said no. Because that was the night I found room 709. Part 2, the room that shouldn't exist. The Holloway Grand had 7 floors and 708 rooms. I knew that for a fact. I had worked there for 6 months. I had checked the blueprints. But as I walked through the empty hallways during my routine check, I noticed something wrong. The hallway on the 7th floor was too long. And at the very end, where there should have been a wall, stood a door. The number 709 was carved into the brass plate. I had never seen it before. It wasn't there yesterday. Part 3, the key that found me. Went back down to the front desk, pulling up the room logs. Room 709 wasn't listed. I checked the master keys. There was no key for room 709. Then, as I turned back to my desk, a key was sitting on the counter. A single, brass key. Old. Tarnished. And attached to it was a small tag. It read, 709. I didn't put it there. And I wasn't alone in the lobby. Part 4, the guest without a face. A man stood in the lobby, facing away from me. He wore a black suit. His posture was stiff, like he was waiting for something. I cleared my throat. "Sir, do you need assistance?" Slowly, he turned. And I realized he didn't have a face. No eyes. No nose. No mouth. Just smooth, blank skin. Then he raised his hand and pointed toward the elevator. Toward room 709. Part 5, the hallway that changed itself. I grabbed the key. I don't know why. Maybe I was in shock. Maybe I just wanted to prove to myself that room 709 didn't exist. I took the elevator to the 7th floor. The hallway looked normal at first. Then the lights flickered. And when they came back on, the carpet had changed. The wallpaper was different. The hallway was longer. And at the end of it, room 709 was waiting for me. Part 6, the room that wasn't empty. I hesitated before unlocking the door. The handle was warm. I turned it slowly and stepped inside. The room was identical to all the others in the hotel. Same bed. Same desk. Same lamp in the corner. But there was one thing that didn't belong. A single wooden chair, placed in the middle of the room. And sitting in it was me. Part 7, the other me. He or it looked up at me. Same face. Same uniform. Same wide, terrified eyes. "You're late," he whispered. I stumbled back, heart pounding. "What the hell is this?" He just smiled. "You took the shift. Now you take my place." Then, the lights went out. Part 8, the room that wouldn't let me leave. I ran for the door. The handle wouldn't budge. I pounded against it, screaming for help. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Slow. Steady. "Your shift never ends," he whispered. I turned. The room was full of them. Identical versions of me. All standing in silence. All smiling. Then they stepped forward. And everything went dark. Part 9, the next shift. When I woke up, I was sitting in the chair. The door opened. A new night shift worker stepped inside. His face was pale. Confused. I smiled at him. "You're late. Because some rooms don't let you leave." The last night shift, episode 12. The office that doesn't exist in the daylight. Part 1, a shift I shouldn't have taken. I wasn't supposed to work that night. The usual security guard at Holloway & Co. office tower called in sick, and my supervisor begged me to cover. "Easy job," he promised. "Just make sure no one sneaks in. Building's empty at night." He was wrong. Because Holloway Tower is never empty. Part 2, the 14th floor. The office had 13 floors. I checked the directory myself. But when I rode the elevator up to do my rounds, I saw an extra button on the panel. 14. I frowned. That wasn't supposed to be there. I pressed it. The doors closed. The elevator descended instead of rising. And when the doors opened, I wasn't in Holloway Tower anymore. Part 3, the office that wasn't there before. The hallway was wrong. It looked like the rest of the building. Same gray carpet, same overhead fluorescent lights, but everything was off. The air was too still. The walls seemed too long. And the nameplates on the doors were all blank. Then, at the end of the hallway, I saw it. A single office with the light on. And the door was slightly open. Part 4, the man at the desk. I stepped inside. A single desk sat in the center of the room. A man in a black suit sat behind it, facing away from me. He was writing something. His pen scratched against the paper in erratic, frantic strokes. "Excuse me," I said. He stopped writing. But he didn't turn around. Part 5, the contract act. A piece of paper sat in front of him. A contract. I took a step closer. It had my name on it. I reached for it, then the man's hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. His grip was ice cold. Then he finally spoke. "Sign it." Part 6, the office that watches you. I yanked my arm away and ran. The hallway was longer than before. Doors lined both sides and every single one of them was open. Inside each office, something was moving. I didn't stop to look. I sprinted for the elevator, slamming the button. The doors opened and inside, I saw myself. Part 7, the other me. The man inside the elevator looked exactly like me. Same uniform. Same tired eyes. But his expression was wrong. Too wide. Too knowing. The Last Night Shift, Episode 13. The Library That Never Closes. Part 1, a shift with no exit. I took the night shift at Holloway Public Library because I needed extra cash. Simple gig: watch the security monitors, check the aisles for trespassers, and lock up at dawn. But on my first night, I noticed something strange. No matter how many times I locked the doors, the library never closed. Part 2, the book that read me around midnight. I decided to wander the aisles. The library was massive, with rows of books stretching further than I remembered. As I passed by the archives section, something caught my eye: a book lying open on the floor. I picked it up and flipped to the first page. It was my name. And beneath it, the words, "You shouldn't be here." My hands trembled as I flipped through more pages. Each one contained descriptions of my every movement since starting my shift. Then, near the end, a chapter titled "The Last Page." The ink was still drying. Part 3, the whispering shelves. I shoved the book back on the shelf and stepped away. That's when I heard it. A whisper. Not from a person. From the books. Thousands of whispers, their voices rustling like turning pages, speaking in words I couldn't understand. I took a step back and one of the books fell open. It showed a picture of me. But I wasn't alone in the picture. Someone was standing behind me. Part 4, the section that didn't exist. I sprinted back to the front desk, sweat dripping down my forehead. I checked the security cameras. The aisles stretched further than before. New corridors had appeared. And then I saw it. A section of the library that shouldn't exist. Rows of shelves, reaching higher than the ceiling should allow. At the far end of the aisle, a single reading lamp was lit. And someone was sitting beneath it, reading a book with no title. Part 5, the librarian who had no face. I walked toward the new section, heart pounding. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and dust. As I stepped inside, the bookshelves shifted. The entrance behind me disappeared. And the librarian slowly turned toward me. She had no eyes. No nose. Only a wide, knowing smile. "Late again," she whispered. "Just like the others." Then she stepped aside, revealing another desk. With a checkout log resting on it. Part 6, the checkout list. I hesitated. But my eyes couldn't help but scan the pages. The names were familiar. Too familiar. Every single entry belonged to someone who had gone missing in town over the years. Each person had checked out only one book. The same book. The one I had found with my name inside. Then I reached the last entry. It was signed with my handwriting. But I had never written it. The date was tonight. Part 7, the aisle that led nowhere. I turned to run. The bookshelves had moved again. The rows stretched endlessly, twisting into passages that hadn't existed before. The lights dimmed. The only glow came from the reading lamp at the far end of the aisle. And now, the librarian was standing beside it. Watching me. Waiting. Then, the whispering grew louder. Part 8, the book that kept writing itself. I reached for my radio, but all I heard was static. I had to find an exit. I turned back to the checkout desk. The massive book had flipped to a new page. The ink was fresh. Still drying. It read, "The new librarian arrives at dawn." And beneath it my name. Then, as I watched, another line appeared. "He will take his place among the shelves." Part 9, the hands that reached for me. The bookshelves trembled. The shadows between them stretched, growing taller. Reaching. The floorboards groaned under my feet. Then I saw them. Dozens of hands, emerging from between the books, their fingers curled and desperate. A chorus of voices whispered in unison, "Don't fight it. It's your turn." Then, everything went dark. Part 10, The next shift I woke up at my desk. The morning sun shone through the windows. People walked through the aisles, reading, browsing, chatting. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't respond. I wasn't standing anymore. I was sitting behind the desk. A book lay open in front of me. My hands turned the pages, but I wasn't the one moving them. Then the door chimed, and a new security guard walked in. I wanted to scream, to warn him, to tell him to run. But all I could do was smile. Because some libraries never let you leave. The Last Night Shift, Episode 14. The Gas Station That Never Closes, Part 1. The job that should have been easy. I took the night shift at Holloway gas station because it was easy money. A small station on the edge of town, barely any customers past midnight. All I had to do was stock shelves, watch the register, and lock up at dawn. But the first thing my manager told me was, no matter what happens, never close the station. I should have quit right then. Because Holloway gas station never closes. Part 2, the customer who wasn't human. It started around 1 a.m. The door chimed, and I looked up from my phone. A man walked in. Tall. Too tall. His suit was slightly off, like it didn't quite fit his body. And when he smiled, his teeth were all the same size. He placed a single item on the counter. A map. No roads. No markings. Just endless, twisting lines. And then he spoke. I need directions. Part 3, the map that moved. I forced a polite smile. Where are you headed? He pointed at the map. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Because the lines were shifting. Forming new roads. New paths. One of them led straight to the gas station. I don't know this area, I stammered. The man smiled wider. I think you do. Part 4, the back door that shouldn't be open. The bell chimed again. I looked up. The man was gone. I rushed to the window. Nothing but an empty parking lot. Then I heard it. A slow, creaking sound. Coming from the back storage room. The door was open. But I hadn't opened it. And I wasn't alone anymore. Part 5, the aisles that kept changing. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped inside. The shelves were wrong. They weren't where they had been earlier. The rows stretched longer than they should have. Then I saw it, a figure standing between the aisles. Motionless. Watching me. I took a step forward. It took a step back. Then it disappeared. Part 6, the security footage that lied. I ran back to the front, my hands shaking as I checked the security monitors. The aisles looked normal. The back door was closed. Everything looked fine. Except I wasn't on the screen. I was sitting at the counter, staring at the camera, smiling. But I was standing here, watching. Then, slowly, the version of me on the screen raised a hand and waved. Part 7, the gas pump that never stopped. A car pulled into the lot. For the first time all night, I felt relief. I stepped outside, but as I approached, I realized the pump was already running. The numbers were spinning, fuel pouring into the car. Except there was no driver. The car's engine was off. And when I reached the window, there was someone in the back seat, watching me. Part 8, the figure in the back seat. The moment I blinked, the figure was gone. The gas pump clicked off. The numbers on the screen reset to 0. I backed away slowly, my breath fogging in the cold air. Then I heard the door chime inside the station. Someone had just walked in. But the parking lot was still empty. Part 9, the rules I should have followed. I stepped inside, heart hammering. The station was silent. Then my manager's voice crackled over the intercom. I hadn't seen him all night. But his voice was clear. "You need to leave. Right now." I tried. I yelled. "The door won't open." Static. "Then you broke the rule." I turned. The back storage door was wide open. And the shelves were gone. In their place an endless, dark highway. And something was walking toward me. Part 10, the next shift. I don't remember running. I don't remember screaming. I just remember waking up behind the counter. The morning sun shone through the glass doors. Everything looked normal. The shelves were back in place. The security monitors were working again. I exhaled. Then the door chimed. A new worker walked in, yawning. He looked at me. I wanted to warn him. Tell him not to take this shift. Tell him to run. But all I could do was smile. Because some gas stations never close. The Last Night Shift, Episode 15. The Motel That Checks You In But Never Out. Part 1, a job I should have turned down. I took the night shift at the Holloway Motel because I needed fast cash. Nothing fancy, just a rundown, roadside inn with a flickering neon sign that barely worked. My tasks? Check guests in. Watch the front desk. Make sure the place doesn't burn down. Easy. Until I realized no one ever checked out. Part 2, the first red flag. Around midnight, the phone rang. I picked up. Silence. Then a voice, low and distorted. "Do not open room 209. I frowned. We didn't have a room 209. Then, in the logbook, I noticed something. The last entry. A guest checked into room 209 40 years ago. And never checked out. Part 3, the guest who wasn't on the list. A few minutes later, the bell above the front door chimed. A man walked in. Tall, pale, wearing an old-fashioned coat like he had stepped out of a black and white photograph. He didn't blink. Didn't look around. Just placed a single, silver key on the counter. Room 209. "I'm ready to check out," he said. My stomach twisted. We didn't have a room 209. Part 4, the hallway that wasn't there before. I glanced at the motel map. No room 209. No second floor. Then why did I hear footsteps above me? I stepped out from behind the desk and into the hallway. It looked longer. Doors lined both sides, all numbered 209. My breath hitched. Then, one of them creaked open. Part 5, the room with no end. He stepped inside. The air was too cold. The furniture was covered in white sheets, like it had been abandoned for decades. A single suitcase sat at the foot of the bed. The name tag read, "My name." And the closet door was slightly open. Something was breathing inside. I took a step back. Then, from inside the closet a voice whispered, "You're already here." Part 6, the mirror that didn't reflect. May turned to the dresser. A cracked mirror hung above it. I stared at my reflection. Except it wasn't me. The man in the glass had my face, my uniform, but he was smiling. And then he raised his hand and knocked on the mirror from the inside. Part 7, the guest list of the forgotten. He stumbled back into the hallway, heart pounding. The desk phone rang again. I sprinted back and picked up. This time, the voice was clear. "You need to check out." I don't understand," I stammered. "Look at the guest list." My fingers trembled as I flipped through the motel log. Each page filled with names, dates, check-ins. But no checkouts. And then I saw the last name written. Mine. Then, the ink began to change. A new name appeared underneath mine. The next employee. Part 8, the staff that never leaves. A shadow loomed in the doorway. I turned and there I was. Standing in my uniform. holding a clipboard, smiling, like I had worked here forever. And behind me, the pale man from earlier watched. "This is your last shift," the shadow me whispered. Then he handed me a key. Room 209. And everything went dark. Part 9, The Truth in the Window. I woke up at the front desk. The neon sign outside flickered. The bell chimed. A new worker walked in, yawning, rubbing his eyes. I wanted to scream, to warn him. But I couldn't. I could only smile and slide the guest log toward him. Then the glass window reflected my face. Except my reflection wasn't moving. It stared at me, eyes empty, mouth curling into a grin. And then it whispered, "You'll get used to it. Because some motels never let you leave." The Last Night Shift, Episode 16. The Apartment That Wasn't on the Lease. Part 1, a gig that felt too good to be true. I had just moved to Holloway City when I found the perfect job: night security at the Willow Crest Apartments. The ad was simple: overnight security needed 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. No patrols required. Just monitor the cameras. The pay was too good for such an easy job. I should have known something was wrong. Because the moment I sat down for my first shift, I saw a floor that didn't exist. Part 2, the floor that wasn't there. The apartment complex had 12 floors. I counted the buttons in the elevator myself. But when I flipped through the security feeds, there it was. A 13th floor. Dimly lit hallways. Faded wallpaper. Doors numbered in strange symbols. Then something moved on the screen. A door creaked open. And a woman stepped out. Part 3, the woman who stared at the cameras. She stood in the middle of the hallway, motionless. Her long, dark hair covered most of her face, but I could tell she was staring at the camera. At me. Then, in perfect synchronization, every door on the 13th floor slowly opened. And they all stepped out. Part 4, the room that wasn't on the lease. I turned away from the screen, my heart pounding. I needed to prove to myself that it was a glitch. A prank. So I checked the leasing records. Floor 13 wasn't listed. But there was something else. A tenant log with my name on it. Unit 1307. But I never signed a lease. Part 5, the elevator that chose its own floor. I sprinted to the elevator, desperate to see if the 13th floor actually existed. I pressed 12. But the elevator ignored me. It went up. Past 12. Ding. The door slid open. Floor 13. Part 6, the hallway that changed. Behind me stepped out. The air was stale, thick with the scent of mildew and something rotting. The hallway stretched impossibly long, twisting in ways that didn't make sense. Behind me, the elevator doors slammed shut. I turned. All the doors were open now. And something was watching me. Part 7, the tenants who shouldn't be there. They weren't moving. Men. Women. Children. All standing in the doorways of their rooms, their faces blurred like a painting smeared by careless hands. Their mouths moved, but no sound came out. Then they all stepped forward. At the same time. I ran. Part 8, the room that had my name on it. My feet pounded against the carpet as I sprinted down the hall, dodging open doorways. Then I saw it. A door at the very end. Slightly ajar. The plaque on it read, 1307, my name, dot. I had never lived here. But something inside was waiting for me. Part 9, the reflection that wasn't mine. I pushed open the door. Inside was a fully furnished apartment. My apartment. The same couch. The same bedspread. On the walls pictures of me. And in the bathroom, a mirror. I stepped toward it, breath shaky. I raised my hand. The reflection didn't move. Then, with a sickening grin, it whispered, "You're home." Part 10, the next tenant. The next thing I knew, I was back at the front desk. The cameras flickered. Floor 13 was gone. The phone rang. I picked up, my fingers ice cold. My voice whispered on the other end, "You need to check in." Then the front door chimed. A new security guard walked in. He smiled at me, just like I had once smiled. I tried to warn him, to tell him to run. But all I could do was nod. Because some apartments never let you leave. The Last Night Shift, Episode 17. The Train That Never Reaches Its Destination. Part 1, a job that came with one rule. I took the night shift as a conductor on the Holloway Metro line because it paid well. The job was simple: check tickets, monitor the security cameras, and make sure every passenger got off at the last stop. Before my first shift, my supervisor pulled me aside. "Whatever happens, never ride past the final station." I laughed. "What happens if I do?" He just stared at me. And then he whispered, "You won't come back." Part 2, the passenger without a ticket. At 2:13 a.m., the train rolled into Holloway Central, our last stop. The announcement blared, "Final station. All passengers must exit." I stepped out of my booth, walking down the aisle to check for stragglers. The seats were empty. Except for one man, sitting at the far end. He wore a dark suit, his hat pulled low over his face. "Sir," I called. "This is the last stop. You need to exit." He didn't move. He just whispered, "Not for me." Part 3, the doors that wouldn't open. I turned to hit the emergency button, but the doors didn't open. The train should have powered down. The lights should have flickered off. Instead, the engine roared to life. And then, without warning, the train started moving again. Part 4, the tracks that led somewhere else. I stumbled back, gripping the wall as the train lurched forward. The digital screen above the exit blinked, "Next stop, unknown." I grabbed the intercom, my voice shaking. This train wasn't supposed to keep going. The speaker crackled with static. Then a voice, "You're not supposed to be here." Part 5, the passengers who weren't there before. I turned back to the train car. Every seat was full. Men, women, children, all sitting in eerie silence, staring straight ahead. They hadn't been there a minute ago. And they weren't moving. Then, in perfect unison, they all turned to look at me. Part 6, the window that showed nothing. I ran to the window, hoping to see where we were going. But outside there was nothing. No tunnels. No lights. No city. Just endless, black emptiness. The train wasn't on the tracks anymore. It was somewhere else. And then I felt a breath on my neck. Part 7, the man in the suit. I turned around. The man in the dark suit had moved. He was now standing inches away from me. I stumbled backward, heart pounding. His face was wrong. Blurred. Hollow. Like something had erased it. And then he whispered, "You should have gotten off." Part 8, the announcements that lied. The overhead speaker buzzed. "Next stop, Terminus." I checked the route map. There was no Terminus station. I turned back to the passengers. They were all standing now. Their mouths were moving, but no sound came out. Then, one by one, they began walking toward me. Part 9, the exit that led to nowhere. I sprinted to the emergency exit, hammering the button. The door slid open and I almost jumped out. But then I saw it. Beyond the door, wasn't a station. It was just an endless black void. Something moved inside it. Something waiting. Part 10, the next conductor. The man in the suit grabbed my wrist. His grip was ice cold. "Your shift starts now," he said. The train screeched to a stop. I looked up at the digital screen. It didn't say terminus anymore. It said, "Welcome aboard." The doors opened. A new conductor stepped inside. He looked at me, just like I had once looked at my supervisor. I wanted to warn him, tell him to run. But all I could do was smile. Because some trains never let you off. The Last Night Shift, Episode 18, The Bridge That Never Ends, Part 1, a routine patrol that went wrong. I took the night shift as a security officer at Holloway Bridge because I thought it would be easy. No one crossed it after midnight. No traffic. No pedestrians. Just me, the radio, and the cold wind rolling in from the river. Then my supervisor gave me one rule before my first shift. If you ever see someone standing in the middle of the bridge, don't approach them. And whatever you do, don't follow them. At the time, I laughed it off. I shouldn't have. Because that night, I saw a man standing exactly where he shouldn't be. Part 2, The Man in the Fog. At 2 a.m., my radio crackled. Patrol the length of the bridge. Confirm no activity. I stepped out of my booth, flashlight in hand, my breath fogging in the cold air. The bridge stretched ahead, disappearing into the mist hovering over the river. That's when I saw him. A man. Standing dead center of the bridge. Motionless. I raised my radio. There's someone out here. Static. Then a voice that wasn't my supervisor's. Don't follow him. Part 3, The footsteps that weren't mine. I stepped closer, my grip tightening around the flashlight. Sir, you're not allowed to be here. No response. I moved forward. The fog thickened. The man didn't move. Didn't even seem to breathe. Then, behind me, footsteps. I spun around, no one there. When I turned back, the man was closer. Part 4, The Bridge That Stretched to Ferry. Took a step back, my heart hammering. The bridge was long, but I could always see the end. Not now. The road stretched into endless fog, no city lights beyond it. And the man? He was smiling now. Part 5, The Radio That Lied. I hit the radio again. Bass, I need backup. More static. Then a voice, my own voice. Don't follow him. I dropped the radio. My blood went cold. The man took another step. His feet didn't make a sound. Part 6, The Fog That Swallowed Everything. I turned and ran. I didn't care about the job anymore. I just needed to get off this bridge. But the faster I ran, the longer the bridge became. The street lights flickered and dimmed behind me, one by one. And in the distance a second figure appeared. Walking toward me. Part 7, The Car That Never Came. Headlights appeared through the fog. A car. I waved my arms, desperate for them to stop. The vehicle slowed. But when I looked inside, there was no driver. And in the back seat, something shifted. Part 8, The Man Who Was May turned back. The man on the bridge was gone. Instead I saw myself. Standing where he had been. Same uniform. Same face. And then he smiled. Your shift's over. I opened my mouth to scream and everything went black. Part 9, The New Guard. I woke up at the patrol booth. The sun was rising. I exhaled, gripping the counter to steady myself. It was just a dream. Then I noticed something, the logbook. My name was written under the previous night's shift. And below it a new name. The next guard. I turned toward the bridge. The mist was rolling in again. And in the distance someone was standing at the center of the bridge. I wanted to warn them. To tell them to run. But all I could do was watch. Because some bridges never let you cross. The Last Night Shift, Episode 19, The Hotel That Only Takes One Night Stays. Part 1, a temporary job that felt too permanent. I took the night shift at the Holloway Grand Hotel because it was supposed to be easy. Check guests in. Watch the front desk. Make sure the halls stay quiet. But on my first night, the manager handed me a list of rules. One stood out: if a guest tries to check in for more than one night, deny them. No exceptions. I thought it was odd. Until I met the man in room 606. Part 2, the guest who never left. At 2 a.m., the phone at the front desk rang. "Front desk," I answered. Silence. Then a whisper: "I want to extend my stay." I checked the log. Room 606. I flipped through the records. No one had checked into 606. Part 3, the elevator that kept going up. I grabbed a spare key and took the elevator to the 6th floor. The doors opened to a dark hallway. Dim sconces flickered. The air was stale, thick with something rotten. I walked to 606, heart pounding. The door was already open. Part 4, the room that was frozen in time. Inside was an old-fashioned suite. The wallpaper peeled at the edges. The clock on the nightstand had stopped at 2 a.m. And the bed, someone was lying in it. Motionless. Eyes wide open. Part 5, the mirror that reflected the wrong thing. I stepped forward. The man didn't blink. Didn't breathe. Then I saw the mirror across the room. It showed the bed. But it didn't show me. Part 6, the room that wasn't meant to be opened. I backed away. The air grew colder. The shadows stretched toward me. Then the door slammed shut. I turned to run. But when I reached for the handle, it wasn't there. Just a smooth, unbroken wall. Part 7, the guest log that changed itself. My radio crackled. Front desk to security. "Where are you?" I raised it, my hands shaking. I'm stuck in room 606. Silence. Then my manager's voice. Calm. Cold. "There is no room 606. I turned. The bed was empty. And the guest log, still in my hand. My name was written inside. Under room 606. Part 8, the knock on the door. Someone knocked. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I pressed against the wall, heart hammering. Another knock. Louder. Closer. Then a whisper from the other side. "You have to check out." Part 9, the room that didn't exist. I blinked and suddenly, I was standing in the hallway. The door to 606 was gone. Just an empty stretch of wallpaper. My radio buzzed again. Front desk to security. All clear. I looked down at the logbook. Every name had vanished. Only mine remained. Then the phone at the front desk rang. A whisper: "I want to extend my stay." I turned toward the lobby entrance. A new night shift worker walked in. I wanted to warn him. To tell him to run. But all I could do was smile. Because some hotels never let you leave. The last night shift, episode 20, the door that wasn't supposed to be opened. Part 1, a job that came with one rule. I took the night shift at the Holloway storage facility because it was quiet work. Monitor the cameras. Lock up at dawn. No one was supposed to come in or out after midnight. Before my first shift, my supervisor handed me a keychain. Every unit had a number. Except one. A rusted key with no tag. "Whatever you do, don't open unit 731. I laughed. I shouldn't have. Part 2, the camera that showed something wrong. At 2 a.m., I was watching the monitors when I saw movement. A figure in the hallway. They were standing outside unit 731. My radio crackled. A whisper: "Don't look at it." I turned. There was no one behind me. Part 3, the knock on the door. 3 knocks. Slow. Deliberate. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped into the corridor. The hallway stretched longer than before. The door to Unit 731 was slightly open. And from inside a voice whispered my name. Part 4, the storage unit that shouldn't exist. I pushed the door open. Inside was nothing. Just darkness. The air was heavy, thick like standing in the deep ocean. Then something moved. A figure identical to me stepped forward. And it smiled. Part 5, the other me. It wasn't just my reflection. It moved when I didn't. It spoke before I did. You were never supposed to come here. The door behind me slammed shut. And suddenly I wasn't in the storage unit anymore. I was somewhere else. Part 6, the endless hallway. The walls stretched into darkness, lined with identical doors. Each one had a different number. Except the last. It was marked with my name. A key hung from the handle. The rusted key. The one I had been told never to use. Part 7, the door that led to nowhere. I turned the key. The door creaked open. Inside was my security office. But I was still standing in the hallway. Sitting at the desk was me. Watching the monitors. And on the screen I was standing at Unit 731. Part 8, the loop that would never end. My radio buzzed. A voice whispered, "Your shift is over." The other me turned from the monitors. Smiled. "No, it's just beginning." The lights flickered. The walls trembled. And I felt something pulling me in. Part 9, the new employee. I woke up at the desk. The monitors flickered. The door to Unit 731 was gone. Then I heard it. 3 knocks. The front door chimed. A new security guard walked in. I wanted to warn him. To tell him not to take the job. But all I could do was nod. Because some doors should never be opened.